This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
My name is Kathleen Phipps, and I live in Provincetown, Massachusetts.
All right, great. So now we'll get right into it. So we're going to start with just some questions about you, just to get started. So how did you end up on Cape Cod?
About 4 years ago, I was having trouble with alcohol, and so I started coming down here and just sort of vegging out and chilling out, and started going to some AA meetings, and I wound up moving here because the sobriety on Cape Cod is amazing. And you know, I'm an artist. It's a great community for that, and I found a full-time job and an apartment to live in within 2 weeks of like the whole thought of moving to Cape Cod from Middleborough. So here I am 4 years later, sober too.
Nice. And so where were you born originally?
Manchester, New Hampshire.
All right. And what was your life like as a child?
That's a broad one. I was the second born in a family of 5 kids. My parents were from opposite sides of the country, and they met when my father was stationed here in New Hampshire. They married young, and we grew up sort of, we weren't rich, that's for sure. It was a struggle. What was life like? You know, I was kind of lost in the mix, I think. I struggled a lot. High school was very hard for me. I got accepted to college, and I almost went, and then I decided to take a complete turn and join the military. So, growing up, I don't know, if you really, I wouldn't change anything. I think it's a part of who I am today, but yeah.
Okay. And what do you think ultimately prompted you to join the military?
Oh, a lot of things led up to that. You know, my dad's service was a small stint. I mean, he only did a couple years in the Air Force, but my father was kind of a straight-up guy, and he was emotional. You know, he would get emotional about the pride, the sense of pride that he had in his job as a military person, and I think that kind of, I absorbed all of that, and it is a part of me too. I had a lot of pride in myself. Why did I join? You know, it seemed like there weren't a whole lot of options for me. I didn't really do well in high school. The college I got accepted to was way on the other side. It was in Seattle area. And I just don't think I was ready, in a mature sense, to be on my own at college, so far away from home with no lifeline, you know. And my best friend, Janet, her boyfriend joined the Navy, and so she decided she was going to join the Navy, so we kind of went in on the buddy system. And it was a good fit, you know. A lot of the stuff I did in high school was very physical. It was rock climbing and into outdoor sports, you know. So boot camp, you know, physically was a breeze. And it was the right move for me. I was a perfect candidate. And I got away from, you know, like when you're a teenager and you're like 17, 18, it's like, I kind of want to get out of here, you know. You get that feeling. So that was another reason. And so I did it.
Mm-hmm. And when exactly did you join?
Let's see, I think I signed the paperwork in 1980, and I went to boot camp in September of 1981.
And what was boot camp like?
Interesting. I felt like, like I said before, physically I was really ready, like push-ups, running, all that stuff. I was like I was in like top shape, I wasn't one of these people who, I'm more of a conformist in a sense. I liked the structure, so when it came to following rules and stuff like that, didn't seem hard for me. It just was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, it just kind of rattles you a little bit. I actually liked boot camp, and there was a lot of marching and formation and all these rules and stuff, and when we would march, we would have to call cadence, left, right, you've probably seen it in movies, but I got nominated to do that, and it was like singing, and it was like this outlet. It was just, I really liked boot camp. I saw a lot of women that didn't like it so much. There's a lot of whining and crying. Mm-hmm. But I kind of enjoyed it.
Do you think doing that adequately prepared you for your service?
I think in some ways, the Navy is not as tough on people as like the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. I didn't go to Marine Corps boot camp, so I don't know exactly, but from what I've heard, it wasn't that difficult. But preparing me for my job, they go over a lot of history and a lot of safety. Yeah, it did in a lot of ways, because you have to know about firefighting and safety and first aid, and like when you're on a ship, you're out in the middle of the ocean, there's a fire, or if somebody cuts a hand off or something like that, you can't like call 911. You kind of are, you all collectively are the fire department, or you know what I mean. The first job I took was an engineering type job working on diesel engines. So I had no idea what I was doing, but I was a newbie, so I got, a little bit of preparation for that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So where did you, where were you serving primarily?
My first duty station was, boot camp was in Orlando, and then there was a school right after boot camp to prepare me for that engineering portion of what my job was going to be. Because before you go in, they have you take tests to see where you qualify high points or whatever, and I seemed to do well mechanically for some reason. I didn't study anything like that in high school. I just naturally have an aptitude for mechanics, and so what was the question?
Where did you serve?
Oh, okay. So yeah, Orlando, there was that school, I forget what they called it. But anyway, after that I got stationed in San Diego. And it was a shore duty, they call it, as opposed to being, stationed on board a ship. Back then, in the early 80s, it was kind of before women, there were openings for women on ships. There really weren't any. In fact, I don't know if there were any women on ships at that point. So I was stationed in San Diego, California, at a place called Point Loma, Naval Ocean Systems Center. And it was a research facility. A lot of civilian people would do research on torpedoes and things like that, and top secret stuff that I didn't have any need to know. But I did have to have a secret clearance, because some of the work we did, we were a platform on the boat I was stationed on at this small duty station, and we would bring the civilians out so that they could test their equipment. So it was fun.
Yeah. So were you actually on board ships at all during your time there? Were you and how often?
In San Diego, no. It wasn't until, well, what happened was the engineering job that I was seeking out and trying to, make rank in, like going up in rank and getting better money, and was really, there weren't a lot of billets. There weren't a lot of openings for me to move up because I was a woman. Because most of them were on board ship. So I went to my counselor, and she said, why don't you look into another job? And so I got into thinking about being a cook in the Navy. So I took the exam, I advanced, and then I got accepted to what they call, what do they call it? Flag duty, which means you're one of the first members on board a brand new ship that's being built. So it's kind of a prestigious thing. And because I was a good girl, I didn't screw up too much, they chose me for this job. And before I went to this, what they call A school. So when I got out of A school, I was an E5, which is like a sergeant. And then I got stationed in Hawaii. Technically, the duty station was Hawaii, on board a ship called the USS Safeguard, like the soap.
So could you maybe describe, like, overall sort of an average day for you, while you were in San Diego?
Okay, San Diego, let's see. We had to be there at 7, I believe. And there were a lot of little groups, little different divisions, we'll say. It wasn't a big command, that's what they call it. A lot of it was small engine repair, like there was a boat shop, they called it, and we had to repair all the engines and stuff. But I was actually, at that duty, I was actually a deckhand. So we get there at 7, and then we'd have to have a muster, which means you have to get in formation and listen to what what messages we have from the top down, and people would get awards for meritorious service, or they'd get a new thing or whatever at muster, and then we'd all go out to our jobs. And my job was basically on this boat called the IX-508, was a front loader, like in World War II when they went to Normandy and they would pull the boats up and the bow would drop and they would run out. That's the kind of boat I was on. It was revamped. And what we would do every day when we weren't on a platform job for the civilians is we'd paint and do upkeep, because it's a metal boat and you're on the salt water, so we'd paint from one end to the other and then we'd start over. So top to bottom, basically I was a painter, and it wasn't like, paint the trim or whatever. It was seriousness. You had to like grind the metal down till you saw shiny metal. You couldn't have any rust, because if you paint over the rust, it just comes right through anyway. So I learned a lot about that. Mm-hmm. Lunchtime, we would get in our cars. We'd have about an hour for lunch. We'd get in our cars and run down to this other base, which was about half a mile down. And there was a bowling alley there, and we'd have pitchers of beer for lunch. And then we'd go back to work. And it was kind of bad news, but we did it. Yeah, it was a lot of booze and alcohol in the younger days for me. Mm-hmm. And I was always tired, because I'd always stay up and party and go out dancing with my mates. And typical day, we'd always knock off at the same time. Everybody would scatter, and we'd do it all over in the morning.
Mm-hmm. Are there any relationships with other people that you formed as a result of your time during the Navy, friendships with people you were, serving with, and stuff that you specifically remember.
Oh yeah, I have a lot of friends that I'm actually still in touch with. Even there's a gal I went to boot camp with, and I think these friendships that you form when you're in that situation, like it started with boot camp, the whole, the notion that you're all in the same boat. You're sort of, there's a camaraderie that happens. It just naturally happens because, actually I don't know how it happens. It's like no other situation I can even imagine. But you wind up becoming close, and nobody can compare to that. I mean, I've had lots of friendships in my life, but what we went through, not that I was ever in any combat or anything like that with them, but it's just something that there's no comparison to. So San Diego, I had, a couple of my friends died, my close friends. So, you get older and people die, but I have a lot of friends from my second duty station, the ship, and we have a group, on Facebook with our boat name, and we're in touch. It's great.
What would you say was the best part, or the best thing that came out of you joining the Navy?
I think at the age, the time that I was, 17, 18, I really didn't know what I was going to do. Mommy and Daddy took care of everything, So when I went into boot camp, it was such a structure, and I didn't have that at home. I didn't grow up with that. So it gave me that structure that I needed, and it helped me to grow up. Wherever I went, there was always, you'd get a notice that said, you need to have your teeth cleaned, it's time for your appointment, and that was kind of nice. But I don't know, it really did help me to grow up quite a bit, because I was like an infant,
Mm-hmm. What would you say is the worst part of joining the Navy?
Worst part, I guess for some people it might be that you're like a piece of property. You are owned by the government, and when you're in, you sign that document. You're part of it. And I mean, even to the point where if you get sunburn, if you go to the beach and you lay on the beach, you fall asleep, you burn your skin, you can get written up for that, for damage of government property. I mean, it's like, so sometimes that idea can be difficult for some people. Was it for me? Not really. I don't know. The long hours, sometimes that was really tough, but I can't think of any one thing that was like the worst part of it. It was like when kids go off to college, it's like a real long memory of all kinds of different things and different changes that I went through, and I grew up a lot. But I'd do it again. I wish I could join today. I would.
So at the time, what were your opinions on how the government at the time was handling things related to the military?
That's a good question. That's another part of sort of being a piece of government property. We are not allowed as military to make any outward statements against the current government. The president is actually our boss. As he's the commander-in-chief. That means he's like the chief of everything,
Right.
How I felt, I don't really know if my head was around, government at all. I think I was just sort of more focused on partying and doing my job. I wasn't all that concerned. I was taken care of. I wasn't nearly as wide awake as kids are today. I just didn't really, like it didn't affect me or whatever. I just wanted to do my job.
Right. So at that time, you were sort of serving during what's kind of known as the Second Cold War, or because you have that period of time in the late 70s, early 80s, where the relationships between the Soviet Union and the U.S. kind of started to deteriorate. How do you think, if at all, that affected your service?
Didn't affect me.
Okay.
Well, it didn't affect me personally because I didn't really. It's not something I was paying attention to,
Uh-huh.
to my shame.
Do you think there was sort of at all like any sort of pressure related to that, or that sort of affected the overall culture of the Navy?
Not on my level.
Uh-huh.
Not where I was, no. We were always at the ready. I mean, anytime something came up, a lot of it was, we wouldn't hear about anything that was specific in that way about war or conflict unless we were going to be deployed, and it's always at the last minute anyway.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that did happen while we were underway, we were in the middle of the ocean between Jamaica and Cuba somewhere, and the executive officer, the second in command on the boat, came over the 1MC and said that we have some terrible news. The shuttle just went down, meaning that's when, Krista McAuliffe and the shuttle that like exploded.
Right.
Yeah, so. But nothing, like I said, at my level, as a cook on a small boat, I wouldn't really necessarily hear of any flash traffic about war,
Right.
I didn't need to know.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Do you think there were there any significant other historical events that happened during your time there that you remember specifically, or that stuck out to you in any way?
Not really. That's about it. The shuttle going down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's kind of a blur to me because of the partying, and the state of my little brain at that point.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I've definitely come a long way since then.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there wasn't nothing that I can think of other than that, the shuttle. And it was interesting though, before the ship was actually completed, we'd have to go between Pearl Harbor and Wisconsin, where the boat was being built, in Sturgeon Bay. And when we stayed in Pearl Harbor, we stayed on Ford Island. And Ford Island is in fact where the USS Arizona and some of the other ships that were sunk during December 7th, 1941, they're still like entombed right there. And I got to know some of the people that were stationed on Ford Island, the Navy, who would run the boats of tourists back and forth for the memorial. And it was pretty cool to be there in an eerie sense, like on one of those boats with no tourists, just me and a friend, a coxswain to the boat, and just standing there over that memorial. There was a lot of history in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. I loved being there. being part of that.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that at the time it was difficult for women to move up in that sense. Do you think there was how else do you think being a woman affected your experience in the military in terms of how people treated you, or what you were able to do?
Wow. It's funny, I haven't really thought about those days, but yeah, things were a lot different. There was a lot of talk, sexual harassment is defined as sexual harassment nowadays, like joking about all kinds of things, body parts, just in general at work you would get, all kinds of comments about just inappropriateness, like nowadays people don't talk like that anymore. It's like it's not appropriate anymore. And back then it was accepted or acceptable, I don't know. And I guess I kind of took part in it myself, I would sort of joke around too. And now that I think of some of the jokes that I used to tell and how offensive they could be and were, it's just a sign of the times. Things have changed a lot. I've never been a girly girl, like, oh, I can't do that, I always wanted to not prove myself, but just let people know that, yeah, I can lift that, and I don't need to prove it to you, but, don't treat me like I am some kind of wimp, but sometimes it was also nice, when I really didn't feel like doing something, a guy would definitely jump in and say, let me do it, whatever. But yeah, there was a small amount of women on this base, and it was always like that. The ratio was always like that. It was always like 20% women. I'm sorry about my phone. Excuse me. I'm golfing. Yeah, things have changed radically. There was some kind of a thing that happened. I forget what it was called, tail hook or something like that, where there was this big scandal where women were being, like really taken advantage of, and it was by officers. So that sort of started to bring it down a little bit, Now, I think it's totally different. There's women that do the same jobs that men do. Like, we weren't even considered for that. Like, I don't believe women should be on a submarine. I just think that's a little bit too confined. But now women serve on aircraft carriers where they couldn't at the end of my duty. They could only serve on like a repair ship or something like that, and stationed in shore, something that didn't go out to sea. Now it's a lot different. Women are in combat. We were not on the front line at all. And I understand the psychology behind that, like, it wasn't just for our benefit, it was for the men that we served too, and how sometimes men couldn't see a woman get hurt, and not have it really affect them. But now it's like, it doesn't really seem to be an issue anymore. Women still do have to kind of like prove themselves to some men, but it's changed a lot. Yeah.
When did you leave the Navy?
1986. I forget what month, but I was stationed in Pearl on the ship, and I wanted to be shipped to Florida and have all my personal stuff shipped up here to Massachusetts. So basically got what I wanted.
Mm-hmm. Is there any particular reason why you wanted to leave?
I think I was tired, you know. The ship was really hard. It was 18-hour days a lot of times because it was a brand new ship and we were still ironing out the kinks and learning how to make it work as a machine, a team, you know, the people part. But yeah, I was working really long hours, not sleeping. I think I was just ready for a change. Some of my friends stayed in. Like, they could be one or two of my friends still in right now,
Mm-hmm.
which is crazy.
Yeah. So do you think you made the right decision in leaving?
I kind of look back on it as maybe I could have stayed in a little bit longer, you know. I probably would have benefited a lot more if I had retired. To retire, I would have needed, I think, another 12 years or something like that. It seemed impossible, you know. But in hindsight, you know, it's like anything else. If you don't, you know, if you take this road, you're kind of there. You know, you can't change the past. It's already happened. So I probably would have stayed in a little longer if I had thought it through a little bit. If I was a little more mature, maybe.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I asked you about your opinions about the government at the time and their handling of military affairs, but I wanted to ask, now that that you've had that experience, now that you've left, what do you think of things like what do you think of the amount of money that the country is spending on the military right now? Because that's kind of a hot topic right now.
Mm. It's insane. It's insane. If you broke it down to like what each specific military person is worth to the government, or what kind of money they want to put into, just, yeah, I can't even, it's just such a huge thing, I can't even, it like hurts my brain to think about it. And I think that this whole idea of a military parade and stuff like that, and building a wall and wasting time, the time that, you know, to take the military away from their jobs to defend the border from people that are just, you know, trying to immigrate. It's stuff like that is just ridiculous. I'm not really a statistical person. I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but I have to say, I'm glad I'm not in the military right now and have to be ruled by our commander-in-chief currently. Mm-hmm. It just makes me nauseous, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of veterans, after they leave, end up struggling a lot with things like drug abuse and PTSD. Mm-hmm. and stuff. What do you think can be done in order to help aid them and to try and reduce this struggling that they face afterwards?
I think things are being done all the time, which is amazing. They just need to be expanded. You know, there are a lot of people who notice what's going on with PTSD, and maybe what they could do is, you know, sometimes it's not even identified when they're in the military, and it's like when they get out, they're dealing with, like what I dealt with, culture shock. I didn't even know how to do a job interview, you know. I went from being 18 to all of a sudden I'm out of the military 5 years later, and I'm like, I don't even know how to live, you know. So I think that in between time, the transition, like at the very end of your military service, there should be more help and, you know, really fine-tuning what the needs are, because everybody's different. You know, some people have PTSD from an injury, or, you know, from situations that they've been through. But once you get out, you kind of like flail, you know. If the government or the military medical government or whatever part of it could connect somehow with civilian life and just expand on that transition period, I think that would be really helpful.
And just to sort of wrap up here, what do you think is the most important thing that the people watching should know about your experience or about the military or the Navy or anything like that?
I am always going to be a sailor. It made an impression on me. It was a good impression. I think I have a sense of pride and camaraderie that you wouldn't learn elsewhere necessarily. It's a real team. I don't know. It's a great job too. I recommend it for someone who might not really want to go to college, because, you know, the military does help with that kind of stuff. You can go to school while you're in the military. Right now, we're not like at war. A lot of people get a duty station and then they go to school. So there's a lot of opportunity, you know. I don't always agree with the decisions that Commander-in-Chief makes about, you know, foreign affairs and, you know, how we deal with other countries at a you know, on a smaller level. But as a whole, I think it's important to know that it's for those people who decide to do that job. Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you for doing this.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah. All right.